I've always liked being alone more than most people. That's probably why what happened still doesn't make sense to me. If anyone should have noticed someone following me, it should have been me. Last October, I took a few days off work and drove out to a remote lakeside park a few hours from my town. It wasn't a campground, just a patch of public land where people were allowed to set up tents as long as they cleaned up afterward. No reservations, no rangers on site. Just trees, water, and dirt roads. Exactly the kind of place I liked. I arrived late in the afternoon. The lake was still, like glass, and there were no other cars anywhere near the dirt lot. I even checked twice, thinking maybe someone was parked further down. But it was just me that should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt empty in a way that made me uneasy. I carried my tent and packed down a narrow trail that wrapped around the lake. After about 10 minutes, I found a small clearing tucked between the trees, flat ground, soft dirt, and just enough space for a fire. It looked like someone had camped there before, but not recently at least. That's what I thought at the time. I set up my tent, started a small fire, and cooked some food while the sun went down. The quiet was thick. No insects, no birds, just the crackle of burning wood and the water gently shifting against the shore. Around an hour after dark, I noticed something that didn't sit right with me. My cooler was open. I knew for a fact I had closed it. I'm obsessive about that because of animals. But there it was, lid half tilted, like someone had rummaged through it. I told myself I probably just forgot. Still, I moved it closer to my tent. Not long after that, I heard footsteps. Not animal sounds, not leaves blowing. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, circling somewhere in the trees behind me. I froze, listening. The fire was still going, so whoever it was would have been able to see me clearly. I waited for a voice, a cough, anything dud. Nothing came. The footsteps faded, and after a minute or two, I convinced myself it was just my nerves. Maybe a deer. Maybe another camper I hadn't seen. I went back to eating later that night. I crawled into my tent and turned off my lantern. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the lake and the trees. That was when I smelled smoke. Not my fire. Something else was burning. I peeked out through the tent flap, about 30 feet away. On the other side of the clearing, there was a second fire. Small, low, recently lit. I hadn't seen anyone light it, and there hadn't been a campsite there when I set mine up. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, my heart pounding. Hello. I called, no answer. The fire flickered, casting shadows between the trees. I walked closer and realized something that made my skin crawl. There was a log placed near it, still warm, like someone had been sitting there just moments ago, watching me. I backed away slowly. I didn't sleep at all that night. I kept the lantern on, clutching my phone, listening for movement. A few times, I thought I heard someone walking, but whenever I looked out, there was nothing. By morning, the second fire was nothing but cold ash. I packed up quickly. My gut told me to leave, but I didn't want to believe I was actually in danger. So instead of driving home, I decided to hike further along the trail to another spot on the lake. That was my mistake. The trail was narrow and overgrown, winding through dense trees. After about 20 minutes, I noticed something strange. There were footprints. Not animal prints, boot prints. Fresh ones. They weren't ahead of me. They were beside my trail, pacing me. Whoever they belonged to was walking through the trees. Staying just out of sight, I stopped. The prints stopped. I started walking again. They followed. I turned suddenly, shining my flashlight into the woods. Nothing but the prints were still there. I didn't run. I kept moving, forcing myself not to panic, until I reached another clearing near the lake. I set up my tent as fast as I could, barely paying attention to what I was doing. As soon as I finished, I heard something behind me, breathing slow, heavy, right outside the trees. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The breathing stopped. A moment later, a man stepped out. He was tall, thin, wearing dirty jeans and a jacket that looked too warm for the weather. His face was pale, eyes wide, like he hadn't blinked in a long time. He smiled. "I was wondering when you'd notice me," he said. My heart slammed in my chest. "What do you want?" "You moved," he replied. Like that answered everything. "So I had to move to—" I didn't understand. "Move where?" He tilted his head. "Your camp. You weren't using all of it." I realized then what he meant. He had been sharing my campsite, watching me, sitting by his fire, going through my things. I took a step back. "Stay away from me." His smile faded. I just wanted to be close. That was when I ran. I bolted down the trail toward the parking lot, branches tearing at my arms. Behind me, I heard his footsteps, fast, frantic, desperate. I didn't look back. I burst out into the lot and jumped into my car, slamming the doors and locking them. I saw him emerge from the trees just as I started the engine. He stood there, staring at me, smiling again. Then he raised his hand and slowly waved. I drove away later that day. I noticed muddy handprints on my trunk. I reported everything to the police. They searched the area but never found him. What scares me the most isn't that he was there. It's that he had already made that place his home, and I just wandered into it. The first time I noticed her, I thought it was just a coincidence. By the third time, I knew someone was deliberately following me. This happened during a solo road trip I took last summer. I had just quit my job and wanted a few days alone to clear my head. So I drove into a rural part of the country where towns were spread far apart and highways cut through endless stretches of forest and farmland. I was about 2 hours away from the nearest city when I stopped at a small gas station on the side of the highway. It was one of those places with only 2 pumps and a tiny building that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 90s. As I was filling my tank, I noticed a woman sitting in a grey sedan a few spaces away. She wasn't pumping gas. She was just sitting there with the engine running, staring straight ahead. I didn't think much of it at first, but something about how still she was made me uncomfortable. She didn't check her phone, didn't look around, just stared. When I finished and drove away, I saw her pull out behind me. Again, that meant nothing. It was a highway. People go the same direction all the time. About 15 minutes later, I passed a rest stop and decided to pull in to stretch my legs. I parked, got out, and walked toward the bathroom building. When I came back, the grey sedan was parked 3 rows behind me. The woman was still inside, not getting out, not moving, just watching. That was the first time my stomach dropped. I got back into my car and left. She pulled out right after me. For the next hour, she stayed behind me on the highway. Sometimes she'd fall back, sometimes she'd get closer, but she never passed me. Eventually, I took a random exit and drove into a small town. I parked in front of a diner and went inside, hoping to shake her. I ate slowly, watching my car through the window. 10 minutes later, the grey sedan rolled past and parked across the street. She didn't come inside, she just waited. I left through the back door and walked around the building. When I peeked out, her car was gone. I felt relieved. That lasted about 30 seconds. When I started driving again, I saw her headlights appear in my rearview mirror. I don't know how she found me that fast. I didn't go back to the highway. I took winding back roads, making random turns, trying to lose her. She followed every single one. After nearly an hour, the roads got darker and more remote. No streetlights, no houses. I was almost out of gas. I finally saw a small motel off the road and pulled in, hoping there'd be people around. I parked, got out, and hurried toward the office. That's when I heard a car door close behind me. I turned. She was standing beside her sedan, smiling at me. "Why are you running?" she asked calmly. I didn't answer. I went inside and locked the door. When I looked out a minute later, her car was gone. But when I went out to my car the next morning, there was a note tucked under my windshield wiper. It just said, "Next time, don't hide." I didn't realize I was being watched at first. I thought the feeling of being observed was just my nerves. But by the time I finally understood what was happening, it was already far too late. A few years ago, I was between jobs and decided to take a long road trip by myself. I rented a camper van because I liked the idea of being able to sleep wherever I ended up. It felt safer than pitching a tent in the middle of nowhere, and I could leave quickly if something didn't feel right. For the first couple of days, I stayed in truck stops and rest areas. I was trying to push deeper into more remote areas before setting up somewhere quiet and scenic. On the third day, I drove into a massive stretch of public land where camping was allowed anywhere. Along the dirt roads, I was using an offline map app that showed locations other campers had marked as good spots. I had saved several, but when I started driving down the main dirt road, none of them were there. No clearings, no pull-offs, no signs anyone had ever stayed. The road just kept going, winding deeper into the trees. By the time I realized I had passed all my marked spots, the sun was already starting to sink. I didn't have cell service, and I didn't want to backtrack for another hour. So I kept driving, scanning the sides of the road for anything that looked usable. That's when I saw a narrow trail branching off into the forest. It was barely visible, just 2 tire tracks and a strip of crushed grass leading between the trees. It looked rough, but my van could handle it. I turned onto it. The trail went on for about 5 minutes before it opened into a tiny clearing. There was just enough space to park the van and nothing else. No other vehicles, no campsites, no fire rings, just trees. The silence there felt heavy, like the forest was holding its breath. Everything in me told me to leave, but I was tired, frustrated, and didn't want to risk getting lost in the dark. So I parked, turned off the engine, and climbed into the back of the van. I lay there for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to calm myself down. That's when I heard footsteps outside. They were slow and careful, circling the van. Before I could move, there was a knock on the driver's side window. I walked to the front and saw a man standing there. He was smiling, but his eyes were darting around nervously. "Hey," he said. "Just wanted to say hi to my neighbor." I asked where he was camping. He hesitated. "Just out there," he said, gesturing vaguely into the dark. I didn't see any lights. No tent, no fire. He kept glancing past me into the back of the van, like he was expecting someone else to appear. Something about that made my skin crawl. I said goodbye and closed the door. When I looked out again a few seconds later, he was gone. I waited, looking through every window, but there was no sign of him anywhere. That was when I decided to leave. I stepped outside to get into the driver's seat. The night was completely silent. Then, I heard a shuffling sound beneath me. I slowly knelt down and looked under the van. I saw his eyes. Staring back at me, he was lying flat on the ground, hiding beneath the vehicle. I screamed and jumped back. He crawled out and rushed toward me, his face twisted with rage. I barely made it inside before he started. Slamming against the doors, I turned the key and floored it as I drove. I could see him chasing the van in my mirrors, trying to grab onto it. It took several minutes before I finally lost him. I drove for 2 hours straight before I felt safe enough to stop. I still think about what would have happened if I had stayed there that night, because that man wasn't just passing through. He had already chosen that place, and I drove right into it.